Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and try to turn complexity into clarity.
And today we're diving into a really massive document.
Yeah, excerpts from a bill titled Bills 119 Hour 1 RH. Some people have nicknamed it the One Big Beautiful Bill.
It is certainly big. Looking at these excerpts, it covers an incredibly broad range of policy areas. You
Oh.
can see it pulls together proposals and changes from, well, numerous different committees just by looking at the titles and sections.
Absolutely. So, our mission with this deep dive is to guide you through the sheer volume of this text, pull out some of the, let's say, most impactful provisions described here, and really understand what this legislation does according to the document itself.
Exactly. We'll start objective, look at the scope, then examine aspects that, based only on the text effects, could be seen critically.
And then finish with provisions that might be viewed more positively. It's all about getting informed, straight from the source.
Precisely. We're focusing on the specific language, the potential effects described right here in the document, just helping you understand the nuts and bolts.
Okay, let's unpack this then. First up, just how sweeping is this thing, objectively speaking?
Well, looking at the structure, the range of topics,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely not a single issue bill. It's a classic omnibus bill, really. Touches so many different areas of life in the U.S.
Like what specifically? Which committees?
Oh, you see provisions originating from committees
Mhm.
covering, let's see, healthcare, financial services, homeland security, taxation, agriculture, defense, education, energy, permitting, land management, government reform, transportation, ways and means. I mean, it's extensive.
Wow. So it's not just focused on one or two things. It's really acting like a legislative grab bag, right?
Yeah.
Bundling together policy changes, spending appropriations, changes to laws like the tax code.
That's exactly right. The sheer breadth means, if enacted as written here, it could affect, well, almost everything, from how you access healthcare or manage student loans,
To border security, energy production.
even how individuals and businesses file their taxes. It's designed to have a really broad footprint across federal policy and impact daily life in many ways.
Okay. So that's the scope. Now, let's transition, as you said, to some provisions that, based just on the text and its direct consequences, could be viewed critically by some people. Where should we start? Maybe healthcare access.
Yeah, that's a big one. Section 44108, for instance, introduces a requirement for more frequent eligibility redeterminations for Medicaid.
Okay. And why might that be seen critically?
Well, the concern, based on the mechanism, is that it could create more administrative burden for people trying to keep their coverage. If someone misses a deadline or struggles with the
Yeah,
paperwork.
They could potentially lose coverage even if they're still eligible.
Exactly. That's the potential downside highlighted there.
And Section 44109, that brings back asset limits for long-term care.
It clarifies that asset limits can be used again when determining eligibility for nursing facility services and long-term care under Medicaid.
So the critique there would be,
It could make it harder for individuals who maybe have some assets, perhaps a modest home, even with low income, to qualify for that really needed long-term care support.
got it. And there are also changes specifically for the ACA exchanges, the Affordable Care Act marketplaces.
Right. That's in Part 4 of Title XXX. For example, Section 44141, it would prohibit special enrollment periods based solely on someone's income relative to the poverty line.
Okay.
Then Section 44142 adds requirements for more income verification, especially if tax data isn't easy to get.
Mm-hmm.
And Section 44144 stops people from being automatically re-enrolled from, say, a bronze plan up to a silver plan.
So taken together, those could be seen as hurdles.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Critically, they might limit flexibility in enrollment, add administrative steps for verification, or prevent people from automatically moving into plans that might have better cost sharing.
What about Section 44145? That addresses DACA recipients.
Yeah, this one's quite specific. It explicitly excludes individuals with deferred action for childhood arrivals, status, DACA recipients, from being considered lawfully present for getting certain ACA benefits.
Specifically the subsidies.
Right, the premium tax credits and cost-sharing reductions that make insurance affordable. So this could be seen critically because it directly denies those federal subsidies to a specific group based on immigration status, potentially making coverage unaffordable for them.
And we also see limitations on specific medical services and even providers.
Correct. Section 44125 puts limits on federal payments for specified gender transition procedures. It lists several surgeries and treatments that wouldn't be covered by federal funds like Medicaid anymore.
Okay.
And Section 44126 prohibits payments to entities defined as prohibited entities under Medicaid. So again, these could be viewed critically for restricting coverage for specific services and putting new limits on which organizations can get federal healthcare funds.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. Changes in SNIP, the Food Assistance Program, and welfare. Sections 1012 and parts of Title CXI mention changes to alien SNAP eligibility and removing taxpayer benefits for illegal immigrants.
Yeah, based on the text, these sections directly amend the eligibility rules for non-citizens applying for SNAP. There are provisions specifically aimed at removing certain federal benefits for non-citizens who aren't in a specified lawful status.
And the critical view there.
It specifically targets non-citizens for removal from certain benefit programs, which could directly impact food security for some households. That's the potential negative consequence highlighted.
Let's move to education finance. Significant changes outlined for student loans and Pell Grants.
Yes, Title XX Part 3. It outlines several changes to federal direct Stafford loans, the main federal student loans. These are set to start July 1st, 2026.
And could affect
Things like the total amount you can borrow, aggregate limits, and maybe repayment plan options. So these could be seen critically because future borrowers might face different, possibly less favorable terms compared to current rules.
And it looks like Pell Grant eligibility is also being tightened.
It seems so.
Yeah.
Section 401(b)(1)(f) of the Higher Education Act, as amended here, would make students with a high student aid index ineligible for federal Pell Grants.
The SAI, that's based on financial info, right?
Exactly. And there are also potential changes affecting students enrolled less than half-time after July 1st, 2025. So, again, seen critically, these restrict Pell Grant eligibility based on financial indicators and enrollment status, possibly limiting access for some students.
The bill also seems to introduce these outcome-based metrics for education programs to stay eligible for federal aid.
That's a big one. Yeah, Section 201(b)(2)(a). It requires programs to show things like verified completion rates of at least 70% within 150% of the program time,
Okay.
job placement rates of at least 70% within 180 days, and that the median value-added earnings of graduates are higher than the median price of the program.
So why could that be viewed critically?
Because it ties a program's eligibility for federal student aid directly to these specific outcome metrics. Some argue this model might disadvantage certain types of programs, maybe those in lower paying but essential fields, or those serving non-traditional students, or, could penalize students whose paths just don't fit neatly into these stats.
And it looks like institutions themselves could be on the hook financially if students don't repay loans.
That's another potentially major shift. Section 454 of the HEA, as amended here, it requires institutions to start providing annual reimbursements to the government for the non-repayment balance of student loans for their cohorts, beginning around 2028-2029.
Wow. The critical perspective there seems obvious.
Right. It potentially shifts the financial risk of student loan non-repayment directly onto the educational institutions. That financial pressure could influence their program offerings, admissions, or maybe lead them to drop programs with high non-repayment rates, even if they have educational value.
Okay, let's move into taxation. Several changes here that could impact individuals and businesses.
Section 11003 stands out for individuals. It terminates the deduction for personal exemptions after December 31st, 2025.
That's the one tied to how many people are in your household.
Exactly. So eliminating it could be seen critically because it removes a tax benefit based on household size, potentially increasing the tax burden, especially for larger families.
And changes to business deductions, too.
Yes, Section 11004 modifies the deduction for qualified business income, Section 199A, used by many pass-through businesses. The change in calculation could be seen critically as it might reduce the value of this deduction for some, especially those above certain income levels.
There's also a pretty significant change mentioned for how businesses deduct research and development, R&D, costs.
Yeah, this is key. Section 111006 amends Section 174 of the tax code. Right now, businesses can often immediately deduct R&D costs. This section would require those costs to be amortized or spread out over 5 or 15 years instead.
And the potential negative impact.
Seen critically, it changes the timing of those tax deductions. That impacts cash flow and could potentially make domestic R&D investment less attractive compared to immediately writing it off.
What about the SALT deduction, state and local taxes?
Section 112026 addresses the limit on that SALT deduction. For taxpayers in high-tax states, this section seems to continue or reinforce the existing cap on how much state and local tax they can deduct federally.
So potentially a higher federal tax bill for them.
That's the critical view, yes. It could increase their overall federal tax burden.
And limits on business losses for individuals.
Right. Section 11-2027 amends Section 461L. This limits the amount of excess business losses that non-corporate taxpayers like sole proprietors or partners can use to offset other income in a given year. Seen critically, it restricts their ability to use those losses for immediate tax relief.
Okay, finally, in this critical section, let's look at government operations and regulatory processes.
Section 9004 makes changes to how retirement annuities are calculated for federal employees under FERS. For those retiring after January 1st, 2027, the average salary calculation would be based on the highest 5 consecutive years of pay, instead of the current 3.
And that's potentially critical because
For many employees, using 5 years instead of 3 might result in a lower average salary figure, which would then reduce their final retirement annuity amount compared to the current method.
and there's a new at-will option for new federal hires?
Yes, the same section, 9004, allows new federal employees to elect at-will employment status, which comes with lower FERS contributions.
Critically viewed, that could.
Create a sort of two-tiered system for federal employees, potentially eroding the job security and standard benefits that have historically been part of federal work, at least for the newer hires who choose that option.
Section 9005 introduces filing fees for the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB.
Right, the MSPB is where federal employees can appeal certain personnel actions, like being fired or suspended. Introducing a fee could be seen critically because it might create a financial barrier for employees trying to challenge actions they believe are unfair or wrong.
We also see fees mentioned for environmental reviews and resource leasing.
That's sections 80151 and 80152. They introduce fees for NEPA reviews, the National Environmental Policy Act, and for filing protests on oil and gas leases on public lands.
Adding costs to the process?
Yeah, seen critically, it adds cost to both the environmental review itself and to the public's ability to participate and raise concerns about oil and gas leasing.
And there are also provisions that seem to push for more fossil fuel extraction.
Sections 8105 and 8106 reinstate higher royalty rates for oil and gas, but they also mandate specific lease sales. For instance, requiring at least 50% of nominated parcels onshore to be offered, and specific acreage in Alaska's NPRA every 2 years.
So the critical view there, environmentally.
While higher royalties might bring in revenue, the mandates could be seen critically from an environmental standpoint because they require or encourage more fossil fuel extraction on federal lands and waters, potentially conflicting with climate goals. And of course, higher royalties could also increase costs for the energy companies themselves.
Okay. That covers quite a few areas that could be viewed critically based on the text. Now let's switch gears completely and look at provisions that, again, based strictly on the text, could be viewed positively by some. Back to healthcare.
Yes. Section 44301, for example, expands and clarifies the exclusion for orphan drugs for rare diseases within the Medicare drug price negotiation program.
So that could be seen positively because
It might help maintain financial incentives for companies to keep developing drugs for these rare conditions where patient numbers are small.
and making it easier for providers to work across state lines.
Section 44302 aims to do that by streamlining the enrollment process for eligible out-of-state providers under Medicaid and CHIP.
Which is good for
Patients, potentially, especially those in border areas or rural regions. It could make it easier to access care from providers in nearby states.
Section 44303 delays some payment cuts to certain hospitals.
That's right, it delays scheduled reductions to disproportionate share hospital or DSH payments. These go to hospitals serving many Medicaid and uninsured patients.
So delaying cuts is positive for them.
Yes, it provides continued financial support, helping these often safety net hospitals keep serving vulnerable populations.
There's also a mention of modifying how doctors are paid under Medicare.
Section 44304 modifies the update to the conversion factor under the Medicare physician fee schedule. That's the base rate for paying doctors under Part B. Modifying this could be seen positively by those providers, potentially affecting the reimbursement rates favorably.
And a big focus on pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, transparency and accountability.
Yeah, sections 44305 and 112035 have extensive requirements for PBMs, the middlemen in drug pricing. They mandate detailed reporting on costs, fees, rebates related to Medicare Part D drugs, and require studies by independent government offices.
The positive angle being.
It aims to increase transparency in that complex drug supply chain, with the potential goal of identifying ways to lower prescription drug costs.
And Section 44123 aims for accurate payments to pharmacies under Medicaid.
Correct. It includes guidance to improve payment accuracy to pharmacies, including non-retail ones, for drugs dispensed to Medicaid patients. Seen positively, it aims for fairer and more accurate reimbursement for pharmacies.
Okay, moving to financial services and housing. Section 5001 establishes a new program,
Yes, a green and resilient retrofit program for multifamily housing. It provides funding for energy efficiency upgrades and resilience improvements in apartment buildings.
which could be seen positively. Why?
It aims to reduce energy costs for residents and improve the sustainability and safety of that housing stock.
Turning to border security and defense, the bill allocates significant funds, right? Appropriations.
Yes, substantial amounts. Title VI has funds for Homeland Security border operations, barriers, facilities, personnel, vehicles. Title VII adds $14.4 billion for transportation and removal operations, plus funds for incarcerating criminal aliens.
And Defense Department involvement.
Section 2011 provides $5 billion for DoD border support and counter-drug missions. For those prioritizing border security and enforcement, these specific large appropriations could be seen positively, providing significant resources.
And big investments in specific military hardware are listed too.
Indeed. Title XX includes billions for things like amphibious transport docks, assault ships, next-gen missile defense, specific missiles, aircraft, nuclear forces enhancements. Seen positively, it's a focus on military modernization and strengthening defense capabilities.
Back to taxation, there are quite a few extensions and enhancements of existing tax breaks that could be seen positively.
Right. Numerous sections, 11104, 11105, 11101, and others extend existing benefits. Things like deductions for foreign income, FDII, GILTI, the BEAT tax, special depreciation, opportunity zones, Section 179 expensing limits, the adoption credit.
So the positive view is simply continuing things that are already in place.
Pretty much. Maintaining existing tax incentives that encourage business investment, production, or support things like adoption could be seen as providing stability and continued support.
Section 110108 also had something specific about tribal governments and the adoption credit.
Yes, a specific positive note there. It provides equal recognition for tribal governments in determining special needs for the adoption credit, which could be viewed favorably for tribal sovereignty and families.
There's also a new deduction mentioned for certain educational expenses.
Section 11009 allows deduction up to $4,000 per student per year for things like tutoring, educational materials, standardized test fees.
Seen positively because
It provides tax relief for those costs, and importantly, it seems to be available even if you don't itemize deductions.
and creation of new tax advantage savings accounts.
Section 110111 creates MAGA accounts, making American great accounts. A new type of tax advantage savings account, $5,000 annual limit for qualified education expenses. Seen positively, it offers another savings option for education.
Sections 1101 and 10202 introduce new ways for employers to handle health benefits.
Yeah, choice arrangements and individual care expense arrangements, ICHRAs, plus a tax credit for employers using them. These help employers give funds for employees to buy individual insurance.
Positive view.
Potentially offers employers and employees new, maybe more flexible, options for health coverage compared to traditional group plans.
And health savings accounts, HSAs, can be used for more things now.
Yes, sections 110203 and 111204 expand what counts as a qualified medical expense for HSAs. Includes direct primary care arrangements and costs related to physical activity, like gym memberships.
Broadens their use, potentially encourages primary care and fitness.
That seems to be the positive interpretation, yeah. Using pre-tax dollars for those things.
For agriculture, there's a specific loan interest deduction.
Section 1111107 allows a deduction for qualified interest on certain agricultural real estate loans. Seen positively, it's a specific tax benefit for farmers and ranchers, reducing taxable income related to financing their operations.
And something for the sound recording industry.
Section 111108 allows immediate expensing for qualified sound recording production costs up to $150,000. A positive for that industry, potentially encouraging domestic production.
Section 112030 made a change related to firearms.
It reduces the excise tax on firearm silencers, seen positively by gun owners purchasing those accessories as it lowers the cost.
Changes to Medicare drug payment rules were also listed as potentially positive.
Yes, sections 11234 and 11235. They include requiring rebates from manufacturers on certain Part B drugs if prices rise faster than inflation, and changes to how pharmacies are paid under Medicaid Part D. Seen positively, the aim is to control drug costs and ensure fair pharmacy payments.
Back to agriculture briefly. Section 1004 dealt with SNAP utility allowances.
It makes standard utility allowances available for SNAP calculations based on receiving energy assistance. Seen positively, it simplifies the SNF calculation for some households, potentially making it easier to qualify.
And generally extensions of Farm Bill program.
Yes, Title I extends numerous existing Farm Bill provisions. Continuing these could be seen positively as providing stability and certainty for farmers and the agricultural sector.
In education, beyond the Pell Grant changes, there were promise grants.
Section 420S establishes these. A key requirement for institutions getting them is publishing a maximum total price for program completion and guaranteeing it to students.
Seen positively for students and families.
Yes, aims for cost predictability and a clear financial commitment from the institution.
And adjusting those outcome metrics for location.
Section 420WG3 allows the value-added earnings metric to be adjusted by a regional price index based on location. Seen positively, it tries to make the metric fairer by accounting for regional salary differences. Good for institutions in lower cost of living areas, perhaps.
For energy projects, there's a program to reduce developer risk.
Section 500.0051 establishes a de-risking compensation program in the Department of Energy. It compensates project sponsors for losses due to certain federal actions.
Seen positively because
It aims to mitigate regulatory or policy risk for developers, potentially encouraging investment by offering some protection against unforeseen government impacts.
Finally, transportation infrastructure sees significant investment.
Section 95001 provides substantial appropriations for the FAA air traffic control towers, radar, runway safety projects. Seen positively, it invests in critical air travel infrastructure for safety and efficiency.
And funding for the Coast Guard, too.
Title XCV Part 2, Funds for Coast Guard Acquisition, Modernization Facilities, New Reserve Authority. Seen positively for enhancing maritime safety and security.
Wow. Okay. So as you can hear just from these excerpts, the one big beautiful bill really is like that legislative grab bag you mentioned, pulls in items from almost every corner of federal policy.
It really demonstrates how interconnected different areas of government and life are, and how these diverse policy items get bundled into one incredibly complex piece of legislation.
And parsing something like this means looking really closely at the specific text of each provision, right?
Yeah.
Understanding its direct impact and trying, as we have here, to separate that from the wider political debates around it.
Exactly. We've aimed to focus just on what the text appears to do based on these excerpts we've looked at.
It definitely highlights how even seemingly technical language, changing a tax calculation, updating a payment formula, requiring a report, can have really tangible real-world effects on individuals, families, businesses all across the country.
Absolutely. Sometimes in unexpected ways.
So after this deep dive into the specifics, thinking about these provisions, both the ones seen critically and those seen positively, how does understanding this level of detail change your perspective on how laws like this are made and what they actually contain?
It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It really is. What specific part of this dense document, as we've explored it here, stood out to you the most? Something to maybe think about further.
That's a good question for everyone listening, too.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. Stay curious.